Good morning, everybody. Um, okay, anyway, I this morning I'm actually going to answer two related questions that were sent to the question box by Linda Cohen. Linda, are you here? There she is. Okay, great. Yes, good. So I'm going to try to discuss these questions, and afterwards we'll have time for questions and answers and a larger discussion. So here we go. Does the small mind have any role at all in one's self-realization? That's question number one. Two is, how does free will, if there is such a thing, relate to realization? So I'm taking small mind here to be that ego self, the small self, the fictitious character in the story of I that's created by the thinking mind or the intellect, and that is believes it has self-will. So these two components, the thinking mind and self-will, is what we're going to be dealing with here. And the short answer is no. Neither the intellect nor self-will have anything directly to do with realization. Let me read you what the 13th century Zen master Dogen says about the intellect, the thinking mind. It is worth noticing that what you think one way or another is not a help for realization. Realization does not depend on thoughts, but comes forth from beyond them. Realization is helped only by the power of realization itself. So whatever you think about realization is totally irrelevant. That's a good thing to remember, because, of course, the thinking mind's always trying to figure it out. But whatever it comes up with is wrong. It just can't do it. So let it do its thing, but don't get sucked into believing, say, oh, now it's getting close. It's not. It has nothing to do with it. And the ancient Hindu Upanishads say about Brahman, the ultimate reality, he comes to the thought of those who know him beyond thought, not to those who imagine that he can be attained by thought. He is known in the ecstasy of an awakening, which opens the door of life eternal. So, same thing as Dogen said. And then finally, one other example, and I could go on, hundreds of examples, really. Here's the 13th century Sufi Sheikh Ibn Arabi, and he writes about mystical knowledge, marifa. He says, this knowledge cannot be arrived at by the intellect by means of any rational thought process, for this kind of perception comes only by divine disclosure. So all these mystics agree the intellect is no part in actual realization. And why? Because the intellect creates distinctions. The thinking mind creates distinctions. And when we take these distinctions to be real, which we do under delusion, when we take them to be real, they actually obscure, they hide the non-dual nature of ultimate reality. So the more you think about it, the more distinctions you're creating. And what you're trying to realize is that these distinctions are imaginary. What lies beyond these distinctions? So thinking about them just creates more and more nets of distinctions that get superimposed on that fundamental non-dual reality. So as for self-will is also actually an obstacle to realization. Here's what God tells the 14th century Christian mystic Catherine of Siena. It is by that death of self-will that she realizes her union with me, and in no other way could she perfectly accomplish that. And why? Because again, the sense of having a self-will is like the linchpin in this delusion of being a separate self, which is the most fundamental distinction, I and other, self and world. And so as long as you're operating under self-will, as long as self-will seems to be there, it's perpetuating this delusion. So that's why Catherine says there has to be a death of self-will. in order for this realization to occur. Here's what the Hindu Bhagavad-Gita says. Always and everywhere, acts are done by states arising in primal matter. But a man totally confused in his consciousness imagines, I act. I'll stop there for a moment. This is something I read on my path, and this is the kind of thing that should pull you up. You read something like this, and I read it, and I said, well, of course I act. What do you mean I'm totally confused in my self-consciousness? I know I act all the time. I decide all kinds of things, do all kinds of things. But the Bhagavad Gita is saying I'm totally confused in my consciousness. What could that mean? So either the Bhagavad Gita is wrong or somehow I am confused. So these are one of the things, the power of these teachings, even though they can't tell you what realization is, they can sort of point to your delusion, where your mistakes, where your incorrect perceptions of things. Anyway, so the truth is there is no self, and so there's no self-will. There's only one will, if we want to put it that way, and that's God's will. That's the Buddha nature, the movement of the great Tao. And that movement, that will, that activity is totally free. So Linda mentioned in her saying this question, is there free will? Actually, there's this false dichotomy. People think, well, if there's no free will, then everything I do is predetermined. That's not the case. There is free will. It's just not your free will. It's God's free will. And everything you do is not predetermined because there is no you doing it in the first place. So forget about trying to figure that theological conundrum out. It doesn't matter. We want to get down to our own experience here. Now, however, and this is very important, however, both the intellect and the sense of self-will do have a role to play on the path to that state of kenosis or emptiness or fana or the dark night, called different traditions, that is the gateway to realization, that makes realization possible. So here's what the 13th century Sufi poet Rumi writes about this. The intellect, he says, intellectual understanding is good and useful for just long enough to bring you to the king's gate. Once you reach his door, then submit and cut yourself off from understanding. For in that hour, understanding is harmful, a regular highwayman. So he's saying the intellect is very useful. It takes you down the path. We need the intellect up until the very last moment, the very last stage. And then it's an obstacle. So we need the intellect. What? We need the intellect to understand teachings about the causes of delusion and suffering and so forth. Here's an example. Here's a teaching by the 20th century Hindu mystic Anandamoya Ma. And she's talking about impermanence. Everything in this world is transitory. So also worldly happiness. It comes, and the next moment it is gone. If permanent, abiding happiness is to be found, that which is eternal will have to be realized. And then she goes on, otherwise, when living and moving along the line of worldly attachment, one's bondage in this sphere increases continually. So as long as we're attached to impermanent worldly things, we are not going to realize what is eternal, what is not impermanent. So this is a teaching you'll find again in all traditions. The attachment to worldly things is a bondage. It's really part of what's keeping us deluded. So now you need the intellect to understand what she's saying here, but very important. The understanding, intellectual understanding alone is not going to break that attachment. It's like, let's say you were taking a course in college in comparative religion, and one of the people you're studying was Anandamoya Ma, and then you read this, and then you get a test at the end of the term. And what does Ma teach about impermanence? Well, you'd say, well, she teaches that impermanence, attachment to impermanent things, prevents you from realizing that which is eternal. Oh, you get an A, but it hasn't done you any good in terms of your own attachment. See, so this is why using the intellect on the spiritual path is very different than how we're used to using it, like in school or learning a job or something like that. That's accumulating knowledge, learning how to manipulate distinctions. Well, we want something else. The way that you actually break attachments is to get a direct experiential insight into the truth of her teaching. Is this true? So the way you do that is then you have to use self-will. That's where self-will comes in. Then you can use your self-will to engage in certain practices that will help you foster that kind of insight, that kind of experiential, direct insight that bypasses the thinking mind. So it's almost like mystics say, okay, you believe you have self-will. Good. Let's use that belief, and I'll give you some practices that you can will to do, and they will show you. And ultimately, they'll show you there is no self-will. But in the meantime, use your self-will, and we'll do that. In fact, Nanda Moyama has a nice expression somewhere where she says, "You fall down on the floor, and then you use the floor to push yourself back up." So we use aspects of delusion to get us out of delusion in a certain sense. So, what are we going to do about impermanence? What sort of meditation could we do? What sort of practice? Well, here's what the Buddha recommends about cultivating a mindfulness of impermanence in order to uh, become detached from worldly things. And here's what he says. He's talking about, he says, thus the disciple dwells in contemplation of phenomena. He beholds how phenomena arise, beholds how they pass away, beholds the arising and passing away of the phenomena. Phenomena are there. This clear consciousness is present in him because of his knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives independent, unattached to anything in the world. So you see for yourself, you watch how everything's impermanent, and you see that there's nothing to cling to. And if there's nothing to cling to, there's nothing to become attached to. So it's through cultivating this kind of mindfulness of what is actually going on in our experience that we start to develop this kind of detachment. So let's try this. Let's try this, doing this very, following this very instruction right here to exercise our will to sit down and do a meditation about impermanence. And I'm going to give you, guide you a little guidance here, but everybody can get in position. I'm going to ring the gong once to let us know we're starting, and twice to let us know when the meditation's over. Okay, for those of you I can see, you look ready. Here we go. So let's begin by focusing our attention on our breath, just to attain a little stability. Now notice that each breath is impermanent. It comes and goes. each sensation that makes up the breath comes and goes, arises and passes. Whether in the nostrils, or the chest, or the stomach. Now expand your attention into the whole field of bodily sensations. From the top of your head, down through your cheeks, your neck, your arms, out to your fingertips. Your torso, your abdomen, your buttocks, your thighs, calves, feet, and toes. All these multiple bodily sensations, each one arising and passing. All are impermanent. If something seems to be lingering, look more closely. See that sensation is made up of little tinglings, pulsings, each one coming and going, vibrating. Now expand your attention to include the sound field. Are there any sounds? Birds chirping outside, maybe a car horn, airplane going overhead. The sound of my voice. Each word I speak arises and passes away. All the sounds in the sound field are impermanent. If there are any tastes or smells present, notice they're impermanent. A little cornflakes from breakfast stuck in your teeth. gone by lunch. All impermanent. Now expand your attention to include your sight field. That seems, the phenomena sight field seem most permanent of all. But shift your gaze slowly to the left. And then slowly shift your gaze back all the way over to the right. All are changing. Shift your gaze forward. Close your eyes. Everything is gone from the sight field. Open your eyes. Everything arises again. In fact, everything in the sight field is impermanent. Close your eyes again. Open your eyes again. It all comes and goes. Now expand your attention to include your thought field, your mental field. Notice all the thoughts passing through your mind are impermanent. They arise and they pass away. Think about what day you were born. What was the date? Thought arises. Unless you make an effort to keep thinking about it, it'll pass away very quickly. Who is currently the President of the United States? A name arises. Can you picture that person, their face? An image arises. How do you feel about the fact they're President of the United States? What's the feeling tone? Oh, a little bud of a story is arising here. Thoughts, images, feelings. Unless you keep them going, they'll all pass away quite quickly. You know what you're going to have for dinner tonight? Everything in the mental field, impermanent, arises and passes away. Now expand your attention to include the total field of consciousness awareness, all the phenomena, all the fields. And just relax and be mindful. Let them all come, let them all go. Whatever is most prominent, arising and passing, just be mindful of that. Maybe it's a sound, maybe it's a sensation, maybe it's a thought, doesn't matter. Just notice that one thing about them all, whether you like them or dislike them or anything, they're all impermanent. Allow them all to arise and pass away without any grasping or any pushing away. Without any attempt to cling to any of them or reject any of them. Just an open, completely compassionate awareness that allows all the phenomena to be what they are, coming and going. Can you feel a sense of pervasive spaciousness, a kind of freedom? No big fireworks, very understated, but there it is. This is detachment. Sometimes in English, we think of detachment as indicating something cold. But no, this is the detachment we're talking about. Non-clinging, non-rejecting, openness, compassionate. So I did this this meditation practice, based on that very teaching from the Buddha for a couple of months on my path. And I do it in the morning and I do it in the evening. When I got home from work, I was still working at the time. And I would try to stay mindful all day. I do it formally in the morning and evening, but then I would try to just stay mindful of impermanence. And so after I got it from my formal meditation, I go make breakfast and try to be mindful of the impermanence of all the sensations and the tastes and smells, and get into the car and drive and then to work. And then, I'd lose it along the way. I'd get lost in the stories driving, and then, but I'd arrive at work and something I remember. Okay, now let's be mindful here, and I try to greet everybody with them mindfully and what's going on, and then I get involved in all the morning's work and lose it again, this mindfulness, and then at lunch again, I get a little the taste of it again, especially if I was eating alone. I'd order a sandwich in and taste the ham or whatever. And so all through the day, and the more I did this, the more the mindfulness extended. So, at first it was just little bits of it, but then it sort of expanded and grew together and became more mindful. And I really began to get a sense that life, it was not the way I had always thought of it, as bumping into these solid objects and so forth. But it was really much more fluid and much more. It was flowing and had this kind of freedom, and that everything's impermanent. There's really nothing to cling to in all this. And then I remember and this was slow, gradual kind of getting this experiential insight. But there was one time after about a couple months, I was living in Topanga Canyon at the time, and I was sitting outside and I was looking out over the canyon, and it's a shallow canyon, hills just across the way and stuff. And there was some leaves blowing in the breeze a little bit kind of in front of me. And I could hear the horns from the cars and dogs barking. And I suddenly, it was just like I was in a river. I mean, there's nothing solid at all. Just all experience was just a river. It was just completely fluid. And and I wasn't even like a body swimming in it. I was a current in the river. It was really quite powerful. It was a really strong experiential insight. And I really could see that, there's nothing to cling to in all this. It's futile. Not only that, I began to notice this then back in my everyday life. The more I'd cling and try to hold on to something, the more suffering I'd have, because it's bound to dissolve away. And when you see that, when you experience it, you don't just understand intellectually, when you actually experience it, that's what starts to break this detachment. That's what starts to give you a little bit more freedom in life. That's what gives you this sense of spaciousness. And your suffering diminishes. This is long before realization, but it motivates you to do more practice because, oh, this stuff works. Wow. So this is what the point of this practice. It's not about using the intellect. It's not about figuring out the teaching. I mean, you have to figure out the teachings to the point where you understand them so you can put them into practice. But it's not about figuring something out and coming to some sort of conclusion. Oh, now I've understood. You haven't understood. You've understood when you've gotten that kind of insight into what's the teaching is pointing to. And you continue to need the intellect, and you continue to need self-will to go on to do other kinds of practices, like transforming afflicted emotions. Really, really important, powerful practice. Doing practices of the night is very important. Cultivating selfless love and compassion. They're formal practices that can show you how to actually physically do it in a formal sense, and what it feels like, so that you can take that out into the world and work with it in the world. So these practices are very important, and the intellect and the self-will is very important. But for most people, there's always exceptions, for most people, the more you progress on the path, the more you start letting go of attachments here and there, and cultivating more selfless love and compassion and whatnot, the more usually the path focuses down, and you need less intellect and less self-will. And most people get to a point where they find one main practice to focus on. This is towards the end of the path. And by the way, the end of the path is different in terms of length for everybody. So the way you know you're getting to the end of the path is when you start to realize, you have this intuition, this is the practice I need to focus on. This is the one that's meant for me. And usually they fall into one of two categories: a self-inquiry practice or a practice of self-surrender. So, um, and then you don't need any more intellect. You understand the practice. I'm going to give you examples of this. And you don't need any self-will once you've committed to the practice. Okay, I'm just going to do the practice. And by the way, usually the practices are much simpler. You get down towards the end of the path, the practice becomes very simple. So here's one example of a practice of self-inquiry from 18th century Zen master Hakuin. I'm sure Hiromi's there saying, "Oh God," he's blowing that one. Okay, here we go. So determined To see into your inherent Buddha nature, you should constantly ask yourself, who is hosting your seeing and hearing? No matter what you are doing, whether you are walking, standing still, sitting down or lying down, whether you are active or silent, whether you are in pleasant circumstances or unpleasant situations. Plunge your spirit into this question. What is it that sees everything here and now? What is it that hears everything? Okay. So you just, who's seeing? The practice we were doing, going through all the sense fields, not just who's seeing and hearing, who's feeling, who's smelling, who's tasting, whatever is going on, whatever sensations, whatever phenomena is arising, who's perceiving this? That's the question. Just focus that, and it says put your whole spirit into that, and all day long. It doesn't. What are you doing? You're busy at work. Whatever you do, who's busy at work? Who's having an argument with a colleague? Who's telling jokes and getting drunk and afterwards and having fun? Who's going dancing? Who's depressed? Who's whatever? It doesn't matter what's going on. Just that one question. And the question isn't always up here in the head. Once you set the question, it's in the spirit. It's an ongoing curiosity, not just an idle curiosity, a driven curiosity. You've got to know this is it. Your whole life depends on this. So you don't need any more. You don't need to read any more instructions. That's the instruction. You understood the instruction. You made the commitment. You don't need a exercise self-will, get up in the morning, say, oh, I'm going to do this practice today. I mean, if you're still doing that, you're not at the last stages of your path. You probably need other kinds of practices. This practice isn't working for you. You can try other things and whatnot. But when the practice gets a hold of you, then you know it's you're in the last stages here. Last stages might last 10 years, by the way. It doesn't mean enlightenment's around the corner chronologically, but it's still the last stage. Now, here's Ananda Moyamai, and she gives advice for a practice of surrender. In the morning, as soon as you wake up, pray, Lord, accept as thy service everything I shall do today. At night again, before falling asleep, pray. In self-surrender, I bow to thee, placing my head at thy holy feet. Try to spend the whole day in this spirit. So the instruction's simple in terms of intellectually understanding it. So you do that. And it's quite specific. In the morning, you could make yourself a Post-it note, So you wake up in the morning, that's the first thing you see on your, above your head or something. And in the evening. And then you could do Post-it notes all day long. Wherever you go, like at work, you open your drawer and there's a Post-it note. Okay. Everything I do is thy service. Everything you do. So you don't have to do anything special. You just have to do it in a special way. So again, once you're committed to this practice, once you're in the stream, once it's got a hold of you, you don't need the intellect anymore. You don't need the self-will anymore. It's doing you. And in Zen they have a saying: "You turn Dharma, Dharma turns you." Dharma is the wheel of Dharma is the wheel of teachings and practices. So the image is that you start off and you turn the wheel of Dharma, and you're doing your practice, and you're understanding the teachings, you're learning the teachings, you're reading the sutras and all that. And then at some point you stop and the wheel turns you. And that's the point you get to at this place. So the need for an intellect and for self-will diminishes. And if you keep trying to do exercise your will and your intellect at this stage, this really becomes the obstacle. This is where it's a highwayman, because it's going to rob you of actually breaking through to the other side of the intellect and will and discovering the truth, the reality. So where does all this lead? I said it doesn't lead to realization. It leads to kenosis. That's my term for it. It's an old Greek word, but it's called in other traditions, I said, the dark night, emptiness, a state. This is a state. It can be a long state. You can be in it for hours, weeks even, or it could be just very quick, just a momentary state of it. But it's when that small mind, everything the small mind does, all that activity comes to a stop, ceases. The thinking, the willing, the grasping, the desiring, all that just comes to a stop. And here's what 14th century Hindu mystic Lali Shori describes it. She was a devotee of Shiva and Shakti, so they pop up in this description. She's talking about this state of emptiness. There, all words and thoughts, as well as Shiva and Shakti, become quiet. In that state, there is no knowledge, no meditation, no Shiva or Shakti. All that remains is that. Oh, Lali, you are that. Attain that. And here's the 16th century Christian mystic Teresa of Avila. And she agrees the same state. She describes it slightly differently. The soul in that state does no more than the wax when a seal is impressed upon it. The wax does not impress itself. It is only prepared for the impress. That is, it is soft. And it does not even soften itself as to be prepared. It merely remains quiet and consenting. So there's no activity here. There's no even trying to arrive at that state. Like, try to soften yourself. It's an attitude. It's just you fall into it. It's a better way to put it. This is now starts to be a matter of grace. You can't create this. When Dharma turns you, it brings you here. At some point, it brings you here. So you don't worry about it. You just keep turning Dharma, let Dharma turn you, and everything else is grace. It'll take care of itself. Here's what the great Kabbalist scholar Gershom Scholem he writes about the Kabbalist path. Only when the soul has stripped itself of all limitation and in the mystical language has descended into the depths of nothing does it encounter the divine. So again, saying depths of nothing. The whole path leads to nothing, to emptiness, to kenosis. Doesn't lead to realization. It's in that state of emptiness that the realization becomes possible. So in the East, they describe this as a whirling a firebrand. Like the small mind creates this sense of self, creates this delusion, the thinking mind, by its activity, which then it mistakes to be a real. The activity is useful, the activity is fine, but it's imaginary. It's not ultimately real. And so actually it works better for us as thinking about it, not a firebrand, but a sparkler. Most of you have probably had this experience at night on the 4th of July, taking a sparkler and whirling it around. And if you do it steadily and in the same pattern, you make this circle of light. It can be quite stunning. I can remember when I was a kid, my older brother would take pictures of me doing this, and then they developed the pictures, and it was really, you'd see a picture of a circle of light. It looked real. And at night, it looked like you could reach out there and grab that circle of light, take it home, put it on your mantelpiece or something. But it's created by this activity. And if you stop, it disappears. And then you can see it's not real. You can see its true nature. Now, you can start it up again. It's not supposed to stop and go away forever. You start it up again. And now it's say, oh, wow, what fun. And everyone runs around doing sparklers, but they know their true nature. That's all that's happening here. But our whole life is like whirling a sparkler, and we don't know it. That's our problem. And I should be careful here. We don't realize it. It's not a question of knowing it. See, if I tell you and you know it, say, well, our whole life is like whirling a sparkler. It doesn't do you any good to realize it, though. That's the whole point. So this is what makes realization possible. So here's Hakyun. Again, he says, Hakyun. When all the effort you can muster has been exhausted and you have reached a total impasse, it will suddenly come and you will break free. The phoenix will get through the golden net. The crane will fly free of the cage. And here's how Lali Shwari describes her realization. Looking neither left nor right, I pursued him. I pushed myself to my limits in my quest. Finally, I meditated on him in silence and found him within myself. So I hope that was useful. Let's end this. That's the end of the formal teaching I have this morning, but let's end this with just a little meditation on an instruction from the Psalms. This is Psalm 46, and it says simply, be still and know that I am God. That's the whole instruction for the whole path put in one line. The trick, of course, is to get to be still. The whole path is to get you to be still, to exhaust all your effort, as Hakuin said, to push to the limits, as Lali said. But the whole thing is to be still and know that I am God. So I'm going to ring the gong once. We'll just do a short meditation on this. Not on this. We'll just do it. If you can, be still and know that I am God. Okay? I ring once to get us going, twice when it's over. You all look ready out there that I can see. Here we go. So first, I would just like to hear from you, Linda. Was that helpful? Do you have any further questions? Are you still there?
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, Joel. That was very clear, very helpful.
Oh, good.
Yes. So I'm going to keep on keeping on, huh? Until I don't need to anymore.
Keep on turning that wheel. Yes, indeed.
Okay. Yes. And I want to take this opportunity to thank this support of this wonderful community. Thank you all. They're like friends to me now because I see all these people in classes with me. So
Great.
wonderful. Thank
Oh,
you.
that's what we're here for. It's just walking a spiritual path can be very lonely, especially in a culture like ours. And so we're here just for that reason, to support each other. So, okay. Well, thank you. I'm glad that it was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, we're almost at the end here, so let's bring the formal part of the morning to a close. And until we see you again, peace to you all.